The sun was setting over the wide Montana plains, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. The wind carried the soft scent of dry grass and earth across miles of open land. It was a peaceful evening on the Cole ranch, but for Ethan Cole, peace often felt like silence mixed with loneliness. Ethan had lived on this land his whole life. The ranch was his father's dream and his own duty. He had grown up learning how to ride horses, fix fences, and survive the harsh winters. He knew every hill, every broken fence post, every trail where the wild horses sometimes ran. But after his wife Mary passed away 2 years ago, the land that once felt alive now seemed quiet and empty. Every morning, Ethan woke before sunrise. He would feed the horses, check the cattle, and ride out to the far fences where the wind blew the hardest. He worked because it kept his mind busy. Work was easier than remembering. The people in town respected him, a good man, strong and honest, but they also knew not to ask too many questions. Ethan didn't talk about his past anymore. That evening, dark clouds began to roll across the sky. The wind changed direction, carrying a sharp chill that told him a storm was coming. He pulled his hat lower, mounted his horse, and started toward the north pasture. Some of the wire fences there had been damaged by deer the week before, and he wanted to fix them before the rain hit. As he rode deeper into the open fields, lightning flashed far away. The sound of thunder followed, slow and heavy. Ethan urged his horse to move faster. It was then, through the tall grass and half hidden by dust, that he saw something unusual. A pickup truck, stuck at an angle near the muddy edge of the road. He slowed down, unsure at first. Nobody ever came out this far unless they had a reason. The truck's lights were still on, though dim, flickering like they were about to die. Ethan got off his horse and walked closer. "Hello?" He called out over the sound of the wind. There was no answer at first. Then from inside the truck he saw movement, the faint outline of someone sitting in the driver's seat. Ethan took another careful step. When he reached the door, he saw a young woman inside. She looked startled when she noticed him, her eyes wide and her face pale. "You all right, ma'am?" he asked gently. "Storm's coming. This isn't a good place to stay put." She hesitated before rolling the window down a little. "My truck? It just stopped. I tried to call for help, but there's no signal out here." Her voice was soft, but there was something in it. Fear, or maybe exhaustion. Ethan looked around. The sky was darker now, clouds pressing close. "You won't get help out here tonight," he said. "I've got a place a few miles from here. You can come in till the storm passes." She looked uncertain, her hands tight on the steering wheel, but another rumble of thunder made her flinch. Finally she nodded. Ethan opened the door and helped her out. Her clothes were damp with sweat and dust. She looked like she hadn't slept in a while. "I'm Ethan," he said, helping her climb onto his horse. "Ethan Cole." "Lila," she replied softly. The ride back to the ranch was quiet except for the sound of rain beginning to fall. Ethan could feel her holding on tightly behind him, but she didn't say much. He could tell she was scared, not just of the storm but of something deeper. By the time they reached the ranch house, the rain was falling hard. Ethan led the horse into the barn, then guided Lila inside. The warm glow of the kitchen light made the place feel safe again. The old house smelled faintly of coffee and wood smoke. He handed her a towel and a cup of hot tea. "You can rest here tonight. Storm should pass by morning." "Thank you," she said quietly. Her voice trembled slightly, and she kept glancing toward the windows like she was expecting someone to appear. Ethan noticed. He didn't want to make her uncomfortable, so he just nodded. "You can take the guest room down the hall. There's fresh bedding." Lila gave a small smile, tired but grateful. "You're kind. I didn't think anyone would stop to help." Ethan gave a small shrug. Wouldn't feel right leaving someone out there. While she settled into the room, Ethan made sure the doors were locked and the barn was secure. The wind was howling now, shaking the old shutters. He poured himself another cup of coffee and sat near the fireplace, staring into the flames. He couldn't help but think about how strange it was, a lone traveler caught out here so far from the highway. Later that night, he heard soft footsteps. Lila appeared by the kitchen doorway wearing one of his spare shirts. Her hair was damp from washing off the road dust. She looked younger now, but her eyes still carried that hidden sadness. "Couldn't sleep?" Ethan asked. She shook her head. "It's been a long few days." He didn't press her for details. He just nodded, offering her a seat by the fire. They sat quietly, listening to the rain on the roof. After a while, she spoke again, almost in a whisper. "You live here alone?" "Mostly," he said. "Got a few hands that help during the season. But this time of year, it's just me." She nodded slowly, staring into the fire. "It must get lonely." Ethan gave a small smile, though there was sadness behind it. "Sometimes, but it's quiet. I guess I got used to that." They sat for a while longer. The warmth of the fire softened the storm outside. Ethan saw her eyelids grow heavy, exhaustion finally winning over fear. "You should get some rest," he said gently. She nodded, whispering, "Thank you for helping me." Then she went back to the guest room, closing the door softly behind her. Ethan stayed awake for a while, thinking about her words. There was something about her tone, the way she spoke, like someone carrying a heavy secret. He didn't know what it was, but he could feel that whatever brought her here wasn't just a broken-down truck. When the storm finally passed after midnight, the sky cleared, and the moonlight touched the wet grass outside. Ethan looked out the window and saw the world shining silver and quiet again. But even in that calm, he felt a strange uneasiness. Somehow, he knew that this night was not the end of something. It was the beginning. He didn't know who Lila really was or what she was running from. But something deep inside told him that she had arrived at his ranch for a reason. And as he turned out the light and went to bed, the thought stayed with him, that tomorrow would not be the same as today. The morning sun rose slowly over the ranch, lighting up the wet grass and the wooden fences that still glistened from last night's rain. The storm had passed, leaving the air fresh and cool. Ethan stepped outside early, as he always did, his boots crunching against the damp soil. The land looked peaceful again, but something felt different. Inside the house, there was someone else now. The quiet wasn't the same kind of quiet he was used to. It wasn't lonely anymore, but it wasn't fully comfortable either. It felt like a pause before something important. When Ethan returned to the house, Lila was already awake. She stood by the kitchen window, her hair tied back and her eyes on the sunrise. She looked calmer than she had the night before, but still tired. The kind of tired that didn't come just from travel, but from worry. "Morning," Ethan said softly, setting his hat down. She turned quickly, almost startled, then managed a small smile. "Morning. I didn't mean to wake up so early." Ethan shook his head. "You didn't. Out here, the sun wakes everyone." He poured her a cup of coffee and slid it across the table. "You sleep all right?" She hesitated before answering. "Better than I expected. It's quiet here. Too quiet, maybe, but peaceful." He nodded, taking a sip of his own. "Quiet can be good," he said. "Gives the mind time to rest." Lila looked down at the cup in her hands. "Rest," she repeated softly, almost like she was testing the word. They sat in silence for a few moments. The ticking of the old wall clock was the only sound between them. Then Ethan asked gently, "Where were you headed before your truck gave up?" She paused, as if deciding how much to say. "Just away," she finally said. "I didn't have a plan. I just needed to get somewhere far." Ethan didn't push for more. He had lived long enough to know that everyone has their reasons, and sometimes questions only make people shut down. After breakfast, he went out to check on her truck. It was still stuck deep in the mud, tires half buried. The rain had made the road worse, so there was no chance of moving it that day. He came back to tell her, but she didn't seem upset. In fact, she looked a little relieved. "That's fine," she said quietly. "I can wait." He nodded again, though her calmness made him curious. Most travelers would be impatient to leave, but Lila seemed in no rush at all. Over the next few hours, Ethan went about his usual work, fixing fences, feeding the animals, checking the barn. Lila offered to help, and though he first said she didn't have to, she insisted. She brushed the horses gently, her movements careful and calm. The animals seemed to like her. Even the nervous mare Daisy let her stroke her mane. "You've done this before?" Ethan asked from across the stable. She smiled faintly. "No, but I've always liked animals. They don't ask questions." That answer stayed with him. By evening, the two had settled into a quiet rhythm. Not quite friends, but not strangers either. Lila helped him make dinner, and they sat together at the long wooden table. The sky outside had turned a deep red, fading into purple as the sun went down behind the hills. It was during that dinner that Ethan noticed how Lila kept glancing toward the window, as if expecting to see someone there. Her fork paused in her hand whenever a car passed on the distant road. Her shoulders tensed at every sound of wind against the house. "You all right?" he asked quietly. She blinked, caught off guard. "Yes, just tired." Ethan didn't believe her, but he let it go. "You're safe here," he said instead. "Nothing gets past me on this land." She gave a faint smile. "I believe you." But her eyes still carried that unease, like someone living with a shadow that refused to go away. After dinner, Ethan went out to close the barn doors. The night air was cool, and stars had begun to fill the sky. When ordinaire, he returned. He saw Lila sitting near the fire, staring at the flames like she was lost in thought. He hesitated, then sat down across from her. "You can stay as long as you need," he said simply. "There's plenty of space." She looked at him, and for the first time since they met, her eyes softened. "Why are you being so kind to me?" she asked. He thought for a moment. "Because someone once helped me when I didn't have anyone," he said honestly. "That kind of thing stays with you." Lila looked down, blinking fast, as if she was holding back tears. "That's rare," she whispered. "People don't usually help without wanting something." Ethan sighed quietly. "Not everyone's like that." She nodded slowly, then stared into the fire again. "Maybe, but I've learned to be careful." There was a long pause. The only sound was the soft crackle of the wood. Then, in a quiet voice, she said, "The truth is, I wasn't just lost last night, I was running." Ethan looked at her carefully but didn't interrupt. She kept her gaze on the fire as she spoke. "It's not easy to explain. I made mistakes. Trusted someone I shouldn't have. And when I finally tried to walk away, it wasn't simple. Some people don't like letting go." Ethan felt his chest tighten. He didn't ask who she was talking about, but the pain in her voice said enough. "You don't have to tell me anything you're not ready to," he said gently. She nodded in thanks. "I appreciate that. I just need time to figure out what to do next." "You've got time," Ethan said. "No one's rushing you here." Lila smiled a little, a real smile this time, soft and tired. "Thank you, Ethan." He nodded and stood up. "You should get some rest. I'll be up early to check the fences again." "Good night," she said softly. "Good night, Lila." As Ethan walked back to his room, he couldn't stop thinking about what she'd said. Running. Not lost. Running. It explained the fear in her eyes, the glances toward the window, the way she jumped at thunder. Whoever or whatever she had escaped from was still haunting her. He knew that kind of pain. Not the same story, but the same feeling. The kind where the past doesn't let go no matter how far you travel. He remembered the days after Mary's passing, how he tried to keep moving, fixing things that didn't need fixing, pretending the silence was comfort. But pain, he knew, always found its way back. As the night deepened, Lila sat awake in her room, staring at the small locket around her neck. She opened it quietly and looked inside. Her hand trembled slightly before she closed it again. She whispered something to herself, too soft for anyone to hear, and wiped away a tear. In the distance, a coyote howled across the plains and the sound echoed through the still air. Ethan, half asleep, heard it faintly. But his thoughts were not on the animal. They were on the stranger sleeping under his roof. The girl with too much sadness in her eyes and secrets heavy enough to fill the silence between them. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring. But one thing was clear, Lila's story was far from over, and whether he wanted to or not, he was now a part of it. The next day began quietly. The ranch looked peaceful again, with the sun warming the golden fields and the horses grazing near the fence line. From the outside, it seemed like an ordinary morning. But inside the house, the air felt heavier, filled with unspoken thoughts and quiet worry. Ethan had gone out early to check the fields again, leaving Lila alone in the kitchen. She sat at the table with a cup of coffee, staring at the steam rising from it but not really drinking. Her mind was far away. Every sound outside made her heart skip. The engine of a faraway truck, the bark of a neighbor's dog, even the squeak of the porch steps in the wind. When Ethan returned, he noticed right away that she looked unsettled. "Everything all right?" he asked, wiping the dust off his hat. Lila nodded quickly. "Yes, I just didn't sleep much." He didn't believe her, but he didn't press. He just said, "You need rest, not worry. This land's quiet. Nobody's gonna find you here." She tried to smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I hope you're right." The day passed slowly. They worked around the barn, fixing a broken gate and stacking hay. Lila was quiet most of the time, but Ethan could tell she liked having something to do. Work gave her a small sense of normal life again. Sometimes he caught her smiling softly at the horses or humming under her breath. It was the first time he'd seen a bit of calm in her face. By evening, the sky began to darken earlier than usual. The wind picked up again, carrying the smell of rain. Ethan looked up at the clouds and frowned. "Another storm," he said quietly. Lila looked uneasy. "So soon?" "Yeah," he replied, glancing toward the horizon. "Montana weather's wild. Comes and goes as it pleases." They finished their work quickly and went inside before the first drops began to fall. By nightfall, rain was tapping against the windows again, steady and cold. Lila sat near the fireplace while Ethan made sure the barn doors were locked tight. When he came back inside, the lights flickered. The storm outside was getting stronger. Then, all at once, the power went out. The room went dark. Lila gasped softly. Ethan's calm voice came through the shadows. "It's all right. Happens all the time during storms." He took a lantern from the shelf, lit it, and the soft golden light filled the room again. The flickering glow danced on the walls and cast long shadows across the furniture. Lila sat very still, her eyes darting toward the window. I don't like the dark much," she whispered. Ethan gave her a gentle look. "Nothing out there but wind and rain," he said. "You're safe," but she didn't seem convinced. Her hands were trembling slightly. She pressed them together tightly as if trying to calm herself. Ethan noticed the small silver locket hanging from her neck. It caught the lantern's light and gleamed softly. He had seen it before but never asked about it. Now Lila looked down at it with a strange mix of fear and sadness. After a long silence, she whispered, "I took it off." "Please," Ethan froze. The way she said those words, quiet, shaky, full of emotion, they made him stop what he was doing. "What do you mean?" he asked gently. She looked at him, eyes wide with tears she was trying not to shed. "This locket, it wasn't just jewelry." Her voice trembled. "It had something inside it, a tiny tracker. I didn't know at first. But someone put it there, someone who wanted to know where I went." Ethan's heart thudded in his chest. He didn't understand everything yet, but the fear in her voice was real. "Tracker?" he repeated softly. Lila nodded. "Yes, I found out right before I left. That's why I ran. That's why I came this far. I took it off before I got stuck in the mud, but I don't know if it still works. I can't stop thinking maybe they still know." Ethan didn't speak right away. He didn't want to scare her more, but the thought made his mind race. If someone had been tracking her, maybe they could find this place too. He took a slow breath and said, "You did the right thing coming here. You're safe now, all right? No one knows this land like I do. If anyone tries to come close, I'll see them before they see us." Lila's hands shook as she opened the locket. Inside, there was a small metal piece almost hidden behind a thin cover. She pulled it out carefully and handed it to Ethan. "That's it," she whispered. He looked at it closely. It was smaller than a coin, silver and smooth, with a faint red light that blinked once before fading. Ethan frowned. "You said you took it off before you came here?" "Yes," she said quickly. "It was in my pocket for a while. Then I threw it out by the roadside before I got stuck. I thought it was gone." Ethan's mind worked quietly. If that device had still been active for a while, maybe someone had tracked her near the area. He didn't want to worry her with that thought, but he knew what he had to do. He walked to the front door, looked out into the rain, and checked the yard carefully. The ranch was quiet, only the sound of the storm. But the uneasy feeling in his chest wouldn't leave. When he came back in, Lila was sitting by the fire again, holding her knees close to her chest. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't mean to bring trouble here." Ethan shook his head. "You didn't bring trouble. You brought truth." That's different. Her eyes filled with tears again. You don't even know me, and yet you're helping me. Why? Ethan looked at the fire for a long time before answering. Because everyone deserves one safe place in this world. Maybe this is yours. Those words made her eyes soften. She looked down, whispering, "Thank you." The storm continued outside, lightning flashing now and then through the windows. The old ranch creaked with the wind. Ethan sat by the door, listening carefully for any unusual sound. Time passed slowly. Lila finally fell asleep on the couch, the soft glow of the lantern lighting her face. Ethan stayed awake, keeping watch. He thought about everything she had said, the locket, the tracker, the fear she carried. Whoever had done this to her must have been someone who wanted control, someone who didn't care about her freedom. He couldn't imagine living with that kind of fear, but he could feel it in her silence, every glance toward the window, every nervous breath. As the storm began to fade around midnight, Ethan stood and quietly placed another blanket over her shoulders. She stirred but didn't wake. For a moment he just looked at her, not with pity but with quiet understanding. He had lost someone he loved once, but Lila hadn't lost anyone. She had lost herself for a while. Maybe this was her way of finding her life again. He turned off the lantern and looked out the window one last time before going to his room. The rain had slowed, but far in the distance, he thought he saw a pair of faint headlights on the highway, just for a second, before they disappeared behind the hills. Ethan frowned, unsure if it was real or just his imagination. Still, something inside him told him to stay alert. He whispered softly, more to himself than to anyone else. Whatever's coming, we'll face it. And outside, the wind blew gently through the fields, carrying the promise of another day, but one that would change both their lives forever. The next morning, the storm had passed, leaving the ranch bathed in a soft golden light. The air smelled fresh and clean, and the horses in the pasture shook the droplets of rain from their coats. Ethan moved quietly through the barn, feeding the animals, but his mind was elsewhere. Lila's presence in the house and her whispered words the night before had changed everything. He had spent much of the night thinking about the tracker, about the fear she carried, and about what might happen if whoever was after her came close. He had lived on this land his whole life, and no one knew it better than him. Every fence, every gate, every hill and hollow, he could use it to protect her. Lila came out of the house just as Ethan was finishing in the barn. Her hair was still damp from a quick shower, and she wore one of the spare sweaters he had offered. She looked around the yard cautiously, but there was a calm in her steps that hadn't been there before. "I want to help," she said softly, her voice quiet but firm. "If I'm going to stay, I want to do something useful." Ethan looked at her and nodded. "All right, there's always work to be done, but I want you to stay alert, not tired. Safety first." She smiled faintly, and for a moment, he could see a glimmer of the person she used to be. Strong, capable, someone unafraid of challenges. The day passed slowly, both of them busy with chores, repairing fences, checking the livestock, and preparing food. Despite the weight of worry in the back of Ethan's mind, moments of normalcy made them both feel human again. Lila laughed quietly at one point when a playful horse nudged her arm, and Ethan felt his chest lift in a way it hadn't for a long time. As the sun began to sink behind the hills, Ethan noticed the sky darkening unusually fast. He frowned. "Storm again?" he asked. Lila looked up at the clouds and shook her head. "No, it's clear where we are. But maybe it's just evening shadows." Ethan wasn't convinced. He had a feeling in his gut, a warning he couldn't ignore. That night, as the wind whispered through the trees and the first stars appeared, he double-checked the doors, the windows, and the barn. Every latch, every lock, every bolt, he secured them carefully. "I'll make sure you're safe tonight," he said quietly, when Lila appeared near the doorway. She gave him a small, grateful smile. "Thank you, Ethan, I trust you." He nodded, though his mind raced. If someone was still following her, they could be nearby. The locket, the tracker. It was all proof that someone cared too much about controlling her. Later that night, as they sat near the fireplace, the calm of the ranch was broken by a sudden sound, headlights appearing far down the road, approaching slowly. Ethan stiffened. Lila froze as well, gripping her sweater tightly, the faint glow of the lantern reflected in her wide eyes. "They're here," Ethan said quietly, though he tried to keep his voice steady. He stood and motioned for Lila to follow him. "Come on, upstairs, stay out of sight." Lila's hands shook, but she did as he asked. Ethan guided her to the small loft above the barn, a place where they could watch without being seen. The horses below nickered softly, sensing the tension in the air. From the loft, Ethan could see the headlights of a truck turning onto the ranch road. Two men stepped out, calling a name in the dark. Lila gasped softly. Why was her name? Ethan's mind raced. He couldn't call for help, no signal and no time. But he knew this land, and he knew the men would not expect someone to be prepared. He whispered to Lila, "Stay calm. Watch the shadows. Don't make a sound." The men moved slowly toward the barn, unaware that Ethan had positioned himself behind a gate, ready to act if necessary. He didn't want to hurt anyone, that wasn't his way, but he needed to protect her. Using the old generator in the barn, he created a distraction. Lights flickered, shadows moved across the walls, and the sound of the engine whirring made the men hesitate. One of them stepped closer to the barn, peering into the darkness. Ethan waited, silent, breathing steadily, ready for any sudden move. Then, using the knowledge of the land, he opened the main gate quietly. The sudden movement startled the men, and in the confusion they began to step back. Ethan moved calmly, giving the impression that the property was alive with someone else moving around. The sound of a horse shifting in its stall added to the illusion. Finally, with a careful warning shot into the air, just a loud crack, no one was hurt. The men panicked. They scrambled back to their truck, muttering curses as they climbed in and drove off down the road. Their headlights disappeared into the night, leaving only the sound of the wind and the quiet nicker of the horses. Ethan waited a few minutes to make sure they were gone before returning to the loft. Lila's hands were still trembling and her face was pale. "They won't be back tonight," Ethan said softly, though his voice carried the weight of certainty. "But you're safe for now." Lila looked at him, eyes wide, and whispered, "Thank you." I don't know what I would have done." Ethan shook his head. "You don't have to thank me. Just stay here. Rest. That's enough for now." For the rest of the night, they stayed in the loft, listening to the rain that had started again, tapping softly on the roof. Lila finally leaned back against the wall, letting herself relax slightly. Ethan watched her carefully, keeping one eye on the shadows outside, but also seeing the small changes. The way her breathing slowed, the way her shoulders lowered. Morning came slowly. The storm had moved on, leaving the world fresh and quiet again. Lila slept longer than usual, and Ethan let her rest. He moved around the ranch quietly, checking fences and feeding the animals, all the while planning for the future. He knew that whatever had happened in her past would not disappear, but he also knew that tonight had shown something important. She could be safe. She could be free. And he could help her. By mid-morning, Lila stirred and came down from the loft. She was pale, but she had a quiet determination in her eyes. "We need to think about what comes next," she said softly. Ethan nodded. "Yes, but first we make sure you're safe here. After that, we figure out the rest." They worked together through the day, restoring some of the farm chores, but always with an awareness that the world outside could be waiting. Yet, for the first time since she arrived, Lila seemed calmer, as if she finally understood that someone was watching out for her, and that maybe, just maybe, the fear that had followed her for so long could finally begin to fade. By the evening, the ranch felt alive again. The animals were settled, the fences were strong, and the wind whispered softly across the fields. Ethan and Lila sat together near the fireplace, sharing a quiet meal. They didn't talk much, but the silence was comfortable now, not heavy, not tense, but safe. And as the stars appeared in the sky above the wide plains, both of them realized the same thing. Tonight had been a turning point. The past was still there, yes, but the future, uncertain and unknown, was waiting. And for the first time, they both felt like they could face it together. The morning after the tense night, the ranch felt almost magical. The sun rose slowly, painting the hills and fields in soft shades of gold. The wind was gentle, carrying the scent of wet grass and fresh earth. For the first time since Lila had arrived, there was a sense of calm in the air, a quiet that felt safe rather than uneasy. Ethan moved through the ranch with his usual routine, feeding the horses and checking the fences, but Something had changed. The night before had been a turning point. He had seen the fear in Lila's eyes, had felt the tension of someone chasing her, and had done everything he could to protect her. And now as he walked through the fields, he realized that protecting her had awakened something in him too, a sense of purpose beyond the solitude he had carried for years. Inside the house, Lila was awake early as well. She moved quietly, still careful, still cautious, but her steps were lighter than they had been the day before. She prepared breakfast, making simple eggs and toast, and placed a plate on the table for Ethan as he came in. "Good morning," she said softly, her voice carrying a hint of warmth. "Morning," he replied, smiling faintly. He took the plate and sat down. The fire crackled quietly beside them, filling the room with light and comfort. Over breakfast, they didn't speak much about the past night. There was no need. The unspoken understanding between them was enough. Ethan had learned to read Lila's expressions, the way she held her hands, the tension in her shoulders, the quiet glance toward the door. And Lila had learned to trust that Ethan's presence meant safety, that he would act if anything threatened her. After breakfast, Ethan suggested they check the barn and the fields one last time. Lila agreed, and together they walked among the animals, fixing small problems and enjoying the calm morning. There was a rhythm to their work, a silent communication that grew stronger with each shared task. The world felt large and open, yet somehow contained within the safe borders of the ranch. As the day went on, Ethan decided it was time to reach out for additional help. He remembered a neighbor who sometimes passed by the ranch in the mornings. With careful planning, he sent a discreet message, asking for a police check in the area. It was a small step, but it brought a sense of relief. The authorities would know where Lila was if anyone tried to follow her. While waiting for news, Lila helped Ethan in the kitchen. They prepared food together, laughing softly at small mistakes. A dropped spoon, a spilled cup of flour. The ease between them was growing. For the first time since arriving at the ranch, Lila felt a small spark of hope. Maybe this place could truly be a fresh start. By afternoon, the police arrived. They spoke with Ethan briefly, then confirmed that the men who had pursued Lila had been located. It turned out they were connected to her past, but thanks to quick work by the authorities, no one was in immediate danger. Relief washed over both Ethan and Lila. The fear that had lingered like a shadow began to lift, replaced by a sense of safety. After the police left, Lila sat quietly by the window, watching the sun begin to set over the hills. Ethan joined her, and for a long moment neither spoke. The world outside seemed peaceful, untouched by the events that had filled their past days with tension. Finally, Lila broke the silence. "I never imagined I could feel safe again," she said softly. "Not after everything I went through." Ethan looked at her, understanding more than words could express. "It takes time," he said gently. "But this place, it can be a start. A new beginning." She nodded, a tear slipping down her cheek. But this time it was not a tear of fear or sadness. It was a tear of release, of letting go. "Thank you," she whispered. Ethan smiled faintly. "You don't have to thank me. You're strong, Lila. You made it here. That's what matters." Over the following days, life on the ranch slowly returned to a steady rhythm. Lila helped with daily chores, learning more about the animals and the land. She found joy in the simplicity of ranch life, feeding the horses, collecting eggs, and walking among the fields. The quiet, once intimidating, now felt comforting. Ethan watched her transformation with a quiet satisfaction. She laughed more freely, moved with less caution, and even shared stories from her past. Small details, nothing too heavy, but enough to show she was beginning to heal. And in those moments, Ethan felt something he hadn't felt in years, a sense of connection, of shared life, of trust. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky in soft oranges and purples, Ethan and Lila stood at the edge of the north pasture watching the horses graze. The world was calm, and the air carried the gentle scent of wildflowers and grass. "I never thought I'd find a place like this," Lila said quietly, her eyes reflecting the colors of the sky. Ethan nodded. "Sometimes it takes losing your way to find where you belong." She looked at him, and for the first time, there was no fear in her eyes, only gratitude, trust, and a quiet strength. I think I can stay here," she said softly. Ethan smiled, a warm, genuine smile that had been missing from his life for far too long. Then stay. You're welcome. The months passed and the bond between them grew. They became more than protector and guest. They became friends, companions, and in a quiet, unspoken way, a family. Lila no longer flinched at shadows or sudden noises. The locket, now safely stored away, was a reminder not of fear, but of how far she had come. Ethan, too, changed. The ranch, once a place of solitude and sorrow, became filled with life and laughter again. He realized that helping Lila had not only saved her, but it had also brought him back to life. The emptiness he had carried since Mary's passing began to fade, replaced by the warmth of companionship and trust. One evening, as they sat by the fire after a long day of work, Lila looked at Ethan and said softly, "I never imagined I could feel safe. Or happy again, but you've shown me it's possible." Ethan looked into the flames, then at her and said quietly, "We've both found a second chance." Outside, the stars twinkled over the wide plains, and the ranch stood peaceful, protected, and alive. Both of them understood something important. The past could not be erased, but the future was theirs to shape, and in that quiet, golden moment, they both knew that they had found something rare, not just safety but hope, trust, and the beginning of a life that neither had dared to imagine before. Lila whispered again, softly almost to herself, "Thank you for giving me a place to be free." Ethan, looking at her with quiet admiration, replied, "You earned it. You've always been stronger than you knew." The wind carried their words across the fields, across the hills, and into the night. The ranch had seen storms, fear, and uncertainty, but now it was filled with life, with laughter, and with the quiet understanding that both of them had finally found a home, not just in the land around them, but in each other's presence. The sun set fully. The fire burned low and the world outside grew still. Inside, Ethan and Lila sat quietly, knowing that whatever challenges life might bring, they had found a way to face them together. And for the first time in a long time, both felt truly at peace.